Okay, let's keep reading the 13th Reality Journal of Curious Letters. We're up to the chapter called Old, Funny and Smelly. Little Edgar, she yelled. A shriek that sounded like fighting cats. The intense smells of peppermint and homemade cooking wafted out of the house with the warm air, and Tick had to suppress a laugh. Aunt Mabel looked as ancient as Tick's dad had indicated, her heavily wrinkled but thin face covered in at least 3 pounds of makeup, capped off by bright red lipstick covering a lot more than her lips, as if she'd been jumping up and down when she applied it that morning. Her small body seemed too frail to support the loud burst of excited salutations that came from her lungs, as she hugged both Edgar and Tick. "So good to see you. So glad you made it safe. About time you came to visit your poor old auntie." Tick returned the hug, suddenly feeling very relieved and at home. She was family, after all, and this trip obviously meant the world to an old widow who lived alone. Despite the icy cold weather, Tick felt warm inside and looked forward to getting to know his great Aunt Mabel. Though he had to admit she did scare him a little. "Well, come in," she said, her fake teeth sparkling as her face lit up like a giddy clown. "I need to sit these bones down. My bunions are inflamed like you wouldn't believe. Take your coats and such. Especially that hideous scarf, young man," she gestured to the side of the foyer where they put their coats and bags. Tick left his scarf on by habit, despite what she'd said. Then Mabel led them into a small living room where a couple of couches covered in orange velvet beckoned for them to sit. A dusty lamp with beads hanging from the shade glowed a dull yellow from its stand on a chipped wooden end table. The entire house looked like it had been decorated with props from a really old TV show. Once they were settled, Aunt Mabel brought in 3 steaming hot cups of herbal tea. It tasted like boiled cardboard, but warmed Tick very quickly. He leaned back on the soft couch and put his foot up on his knee, eager to see Mabel in action. "Well, land's sake, it's a delight to see you boys," she started. "Living up here at the North Pole with nothing but 17 quilts and a couple of icicles to keep you company makes a woman grow old quicker than she should. And let me tell you, when you were born before any of your neighbours' grandparents, you can forget having friends come over to play Pinocchio and watch reruns of Andy Griffith." Mabel paused, but only long enough to take in a huge gasping breath. "There's this boy that lives down the corner, mean as a snake, I tell you. He came over to shovel my driveway after the last storm, but he didn't put salt on the pavement to melt the ice. The nerve of that young troublemaker." After coming from the wintry air into a nice warm house, and after a long day of busy travel, Tick felt his eyelids drooping as Aunt Mabel continued to rant about each of her neighbours and their various faults and crimes. He tensed his muscles in an attempt to wake himself up. "And Mrs. Johnson down the road, I'm pretty sure she's a spy for the Homeland Security International Espionage and Intelligence Spy Division. Always snooping, asking questions. You know, just the other day, I was taking my garbage out to the road as she was walking by. Do you know what she said to me?" Mabel didn't pause long enough for anyone to answer. "She had the nerve to ask me how my health was doing. I tell you right here and now, I bet she wants to set up a sting operation from this house once I'm dead and gone, buried like a sack of dirty clothes in the town dump. And Mrs. King up by the corner, did you know she has... Mr. King up by the corner, did you know he has 13 children? And every last one of them the spawn of the devil, or my name isn't Mabel Ruth Gertrude Higginbottom Fredrickson." And so it went for at least another 20 minutes, Tick finally having to pinch himself to stay awake. His dad seemed pleased as could be, smiling and nodding the entire time, throwing out a few hmms and ahas every now and then. Finally, as though she'd exhausted her capacity to use her frail body's vocal cords, Mabel stopped talking and leaned back in her seat. "Oh, wow," Dad mumbled, caught off guard that his aunt had actually quit yapping. "Sounds like your life is a lot more interesting than you let on, Aunt Mabel." "We're sure glad we could come and visit you." Oh, he looked over at Tick, raising his eyebrows. Tick straightened in his seat. "Yeah, I'm really excited I finally get to meet you." He raised his cup as if saluting and immediately felt like an idiot. "You boys aren't mocking me, are you?" Mabel asked, her eyes narrowing. "No," Tick and his dad said in unison. "Good. Let's eat some supper." She squirmed in her seat but couldn't move an inch. "Atticus, dear boy, be a gentleman and assist your elders." She held out a hand. Tick jumped up and gently helped her stand, then escorted her into the cramped but cosy kitchen. A wave of mouth-watering smells bombarded them when they entered, and Tick proceeded to eat the most scrumptious meal he'd had in a long time, which was saying a lot considering how good a cook his mum was. There were freshly baked rolls soaked in butter, grilled chicken with lemon sauce, corn on the cob, mashed potatoes and with chunks of garlic, all of it delicious. Aunt Mabel talked the entire time they ate, covering every topic from her ingrown toenail to how she'd finally lost her last tooth to decay. But Tick barely heard her, enjoying 3 more helpings of the fantastic dinner. Frasier crept up to the car of his prey, his eyes flickering to the house of the old woman. He'd watched their shadows leave the front room and head deeper into the house, probably to the kitchen for dinner. The thought made his stomach rumble, and he resolved to ditch this place and find something to eat as soon as he'd accomplished his task. Even expert spies like himself had to chow down every once in a while. He crouched behind the left front tyre, making sure the body of the car stayed between him and the house. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the special device, an oval-shaped metal container, about 8 inches long and 3 inches wide, a seam wrapped around the middle. On one side of the seam, several buttons and dials poked out. Frasier looked at the familiar label on the other side, the label that marked items taken from the fourth reality. Manufactured by Chew Industries. He split the little machine into 2 pieces along the seam, slipping the part with the controls back into his pocket. The other half, with its dozens of wires and clamps coiled inside like poisonous snakes ready to wreak havoc, didn't look nearly as menacing as it should, considering what Frasier knew it could do to something like a car. More precisely, what it would do indirectly to the people inside the car. Frasier snickered, then reached underneath the wheel arch to place the Chew device as far and as deep as he could towards the engine. He pushed the small button in the middle and heard a hiss, followed by a metallic clunk as the gadget reached out with tiny claws and adhered itself to the car. A spattering of tiny clicks rang out as the machine crawled its way to where it needed to go. Smart little devices, these things. In a matter of moments, the beautiful but deadly trinket would find exactly what it needed. Once in place, it only needed Frasier's signal to come alive. Aunt Mabel must think I'm 3 years old, Tick thought. It all started at bedtime. Mabel followed Tick into the bathroom and pulled a container of floss from a dusty cabinet. She yanked off a 3-foot-long piece and handed it to Tick. "Now, catch every nook and cranny," she said, as Tick started threading the minty string between his 2 front teeth. "You never can tell what nasty little monsters are having a nice meal of your gums." Tick finished and threw the used floss into a small wastebasket, wishing Mabel would leave him alone. When she didn't move an inch, hovering behind him as he stared into the mirror, Tick reached over and grabbed his toothbrush and toothpaste. Warily glancing back at Mabel, he finally turned on the water and started brushing. "Here, let me take a turn," Mabel said a few seconds later. To Tick's horror, she reached around his shoulder and grabbed the toothbrush from his hand and began vigorously scrubbing his teeth, pushing his head down lower with her other hand. Tick never would have thought such an old, frail woman could have so much strength in her arms. "Got to get those molars," she yelled with enthusiasm. Next came pajama time. Tick had brought a pair of flannel trousers and a t-shirt to sleep in, but that was not good enough for Aunt Mabel. She went to the basement and dug through some boxes before returning with a musty old pair of long johns that were as red as her lipstick and looked like Santa's underwear. Tick begrudgingly put them on, heeding his dad's pleas that they do everything humanly possible to make the old woman happy so nothing jeopardised their trek the next day. He almost broke his promise when Mabel topped everything off by twisting a scratchy wool stocking cap onto his head. Instead, he forced a grin and followed her to the bed she'd prepared for him. After tucking him in with no fewer than 7 thick quilts, Mabel kissed him on the forehead and sang him a bedtime song, which sounded like a half-dead vulture warning its brothers that the chicken hawk he'd just eaten was poisonous. Tick closed his eyes, hoping that if Mabel thought he was asleep, he could avoid an encore. Satisfied, Aunt Mabel tiptoed out of the room, making sure before she closed the door that the night light she'd plugged in worked properly. Tick rolled over, wondering if his great aunt would do the same routine with his dad. When he finally stopped laughing at the image of Mabel brushing his dad's teeth, Tick fell asleep. The next morning, after a wonderful meal of eggs, bacon, sausages, cheese, biscuits, and freshly squeezed orange juice, and after a long lecture on how important it was not to talk to strangers, especially those holding guns or any with missing any teeth, Tick and his dad were able to escape for a day of exploring the wonders of Alaska. Aunt Mabel seemed exhausted from her efforts and couldn't hide the fact that she was almost relieved to get some rest from taking care of the boys. After filling up the car with petrol and junk food, Tick and his dad began their 3-hour journey, the Journal of Curious Letters sitting on the seat between them. Next stop, Macadamia, Alaska. Chapter 22. Going Postal. After driving down the straightest road Tick had ever seen, with nothing but huge piles of snow and ice on either side, they pulled into the small town of Macadamia right around noon. The first thing they did was stop at a petrol station to fill up the car for the drive back so they wouldn't have to do it later. The cracked and frozen streets were deserted, with only a few cars parked along the main road in front of various dilapidated shops and dirty service centres. "Well, I figure we have about 6 hours until we need to head back," Tick's dad said as he started the car again. "Or, if we don't discover anything today, we can always call Aunt Mabel and tell her we got stuck somewhere for the night and that we'll come back tomorrow. She won't want us taking any risks." "Yeah," Tick said, "but she'll be spitting nails if I'm stranded at some nasty hotel without her there to brush my teeth for me." His dad laughed. "You're a good sport, Professor. Now, you know why your mum and Lisa were just fine letting the two of us to come up here alone." He put the car into gear and drove away from the petrol station. "The lady in there said the post office was just up here on Main Street. That'll be our first stop." 5 minutes later, Tick followed his dad through the frosted glass door of the post office, loosening his scarf, not sure what to expect. But he did have an odd sensation in his stomach, knowing the original mysterious letter from MG had been mailed from this very building. It was almost like seeing the hospital room where you'd been born, or a house your ancestor had built. Despite how he felt, this was where any investigation would have to begin. He just hoped it didn't end here as well. The place was boring, nothing but grey walls and grey floors and grey counters. The only thing breaking the monotony was a tiny faded Christmas tree in a corner with 6 or 7 ornaments hanging from the sparse branches. No worker was in sight. "Hello," Dad called into the emptiness. A little bell sat on the main counter. He gave it a ring. A few seconds later, an old man with bushy eyebrows and white stubble on his cheeks and chin appeared from the back, looking none too happy that he actually had to serve a customer. "What can I do for you?" he asked in a gruff voice before his feeble attempt at a smile. "Oh, yes, we have a question for you." Dad stumbled on his words as if not sure of himself now that the investigation had officially begun. "We received a letter postmarked from this town in the middle of last month, in November, and we're trying to find the person who sent it to us, and so here we are." He rubbed his eyes with both hands and groaned. "Tick, your turn." "Oh, yeah." Tick pulled the original envelope from his journal, where he'd stuck it between 2 pages, and placed it on the counter. "Here it is. Does this look familiar to you at all, or the handwriting?" The man leaned forwards and for some reason sniffed the envelope. "Doesn't mean a thing to me. Good day." He turned and took a step back towards the office. Tick felt his heart sinking towards his stomach. His dad gave him a worried look, then quickly said to the man, "Wait, does anyone else work here? Could we speak to them?" The old man turned and gave them an evil glare. "This is a small town, you hear me? I retired a long time ago until I was forced to come back last month because one of the workers decided he was a psycho and up and quit. Good riddance. If you want to talk to him, be my guest." "What was his name?" Tick asked, "and where does he live?" The formerly retired postal worker sighed. "Norbert Johnson. Lives north of here, the very last house on Main Street. Don't tell him I sent you." The man left the room without another word or a goodbye. They pulled up in their car at the dead end of Main Street, staring at a small house that seemed to huddle in the cold, miserable and heartbroken. Tick didn't know if it officially approached haunted house status, but it was close. 2 stories, broken shutters hanging on for dear life. Peeling white paint, a couple of dim lights shone through the windows like dying fires. 2 wilted trees, looking as though they hadn't sprouted leaves in decades, stood like undernourished sentinels on either side of the short and broken driveway. "Son," his dad said, "maybe this time you should do the talking." "Dad, you're supposed to be the grown-up in this group." "Well, that's why I'll provide the muscle and protect you from harm. You're the brains of this outfit. You do the talking." He winked at his son, then climbed out of the car. Tick grabbed his journal and followed him down the icy driveway, up the creaky wooden stairs of the snow-covered porch, then to the sad-looking front door, brown and sagging on its hinges. His dad knocked without hesitating. A long moment passed with no answer or noise from inside. Tick shivered in the biting cold and rubbed his arms. His dad knocked again, then found a barely visible doorbell and pushed it, though it didn't work. Another half-minute went by without so much as a creak from the house. Dad moaned. "Don't tell me we came all this way and the man we need to talk to is on holiday in sunny Florida." Tick craned his neck to look at a window on the first floor. There are lights on inside. Someone has to be home. "I don't know. We always leave a light on when we go on holiday. It scares the burglars away." He knocked again, half-heartedly. "Come on, let's go." With slumped shoulders, they started down the porch steps. They were halfway down the pavement when they heard a scraping sound from behind and above them. Then a low, tired voice. "What do you folks want?" Tick turned to see a dishevelled, grey-haired man peeking out of an upstairs window, his eyes darting back and forth around the yard, looking for anything and everything. We're trying to find Norbert Johnson," Tick shouted up to the window. "We have some questions about a letter mailed from here." The man muttered something unintelligible before letting out a little shriek. "Do you work for Master George or Mistress Jane?" Tick and his dad exchanged a baffled look. "Master George?" Dad said under his breath, then looked back up towards the man in the window. "Never heard of either of them, but my son got a letter from someone named MG. Could be the same person, I guess." The man paused, his squinty eyes scrutinizing the man and the boy below for signs of trouble. "Do you swear you've never heard of a woman named Mistress Jane in your life?" "Never," Tick and his dad said in unison. You've never seen or worked for a lady dressed all in yellow who's as bald as Bigfoot is hairy?" Tick couldn't believe how weird this whole conversation had become. "Never." The man slammed his window shut without saying another word, leaving Tick to wonder if this Norbert guy really had gone bonkers like the old postal worker had suggested. The front door popped open and Norbert stuck his head out, smoothing his thin grey hair. "Come on in," he said in a quick, tight voice, looking around the yard again. "I've got something for you." Fraser had pulled to the side of the road 2 houses down from the one at the end of the street, curious as to what Tick and his dad would learn from the man who lived there. It seemed they merely wanted to discover if the postal workers knew who had mailed the letter they'd received, but something about the whole thing seemed fishy. With his spy equipment, conical sound trapper, thermomagnetically heightened microphones and moulded earpieces, Fraser had heard every word exchanged in the post office and had found it quite interesting. Norbert Johnson. The name didn't ring a bell, But Mistress Jane certainly didn't tell him about every person she came across in her travels. Maybe she'd interrogated Johnson about the whole affair. That would have been enough to drive any man crazy. The way Norbert had acted at his own house, all nerves and paranoid before finally letting the two strangers in, sure seemed to support the crazy theory. Fraser picked up his eavesdropping gadget and pointed it at the house, then reinserted his earpieces. It took a few seconds to pinpoint the murmurs of the conversation before he locked it in place as best he could, settling back to have a listen. The first thing he heard made his eyes widen. It was the voice of the man named Norbert. "Here you go. The big lady told me it's called the Sixth Clue." Chapter 23, Bonding with Norbert. "Big lady?" Tick asked, holding the yellow envelope like his life depended on it. "Who gave this to you?" They sat in a messy living room, not a single piece of furniture matching any of the others. At least it's warm, Tick thought. He and his dad sat on a frumpy couch that leaned towards the middle, facing Norbert on his rickety old chair, where he wrung his hands and rocked back and forth. "Big old tall woman, looked like ugly on a stick," Norbert answered in almost a whisper. "Just about scared me out of my pants, with her a-comin' out of the old graveyard behind my house." The mention of a cemetery made Tick's ears perk up. It can't be a coincidence. It must be related somehow to the fourth clue and where he was supposed to go on May the 6th. "Did she say anything else to you?" Dad asked. "Talk to you at all?" "Not much." Norbert's fidgeting made Tick's head dizzy. "Told me some real smart kids would have come a-looking for me and I should give that there letter to 'em. Gave me several envelope copies. Don't know about you fellas, but when an 8-foot monster lady tells me to do something, I'm going to pretty much do it. So there you go." Tick inserted his thumb under the flap and started ripping open the envelope as Norbert kept talking. "Since that piece of parcel looked just like the ones from the British fella, and since I figured the British fella was an enemy of the banana lady, I reckoned I'd be doing a good task." Tick stopped just before pulling out the white cardstock of the sixth clue. British? Who was British? His dad leaned forwards, a surprisingly difficult task that made the pitiful couch groan like a captured wolverine. "Mr. Johnson, I'm more confused than the Easter Bunny at a Christmas party. Could you please tell us everything you know about the letter we got from Alaska and who sent it? Maybe start from the beginning." "The Easter Bunny at a..." Tick began, a questioning smirk on his face. "Quiet, son." Norbert finally settled back in his chair and began his story, seemingly relieved that he'd been given a direction on how to go about this conversation. Though Tick desperately wanted to read the next clue, he slipped it inside his journal and listened to the strange man from Alaska. "I'd worked there at the post office in Macadamia for 20 plus years, and I was just as happy as can be. Well, as happy as a single man in his 50s who smells like a little boiled cabbage can be." Tick involuntarily sniffed at this point, then tried to cover it up by scratching his nose. Norbert continued without noticing. "Then they had to come along and ruin my life. It was a cold day in November. Of course, every day is cold in November when you live up here, if you know what I mean. Anyway, first this bushy little British gent named Master George, dressed all fancy-like, comes walking into my shop holding a box of letters that looked just like the one I gave you." He pointed at the journal in Tick's lap. "Goes off about how they need to get out right away. Doo-dah, doo-dah." Tick decided that last part was Norbert's way of saying etc., etc., and held in a laugh. "I assured the fella I'd take care of it and he left. Wasn't half an hour later when the scariest woman I've ever laid eyes upon came a-stomping in, dressed from head to toe in nothing but yellow, and she was bald, not a hair on her noggin to be found. Called herself Mistress Jane, and she was mean, I'm telling you, mean. You could feel it coming off her in waves." Norbert shivered. "What did she want?" Dad asked. "She was a-looking for Master George, which told me right away that the British gent must be a good guy because Lemony Jane surely wasn't." Tick felt like the final mystery of a great book had been revealed to him. The source of the letters suddenly had a name, a description. He was no longer a couple of initials in a blurred image. MG had become Master George from England, and he was a good guy. She threatened me, Norbert continued. She was cruel, and I couldn't get her out of my mind. Still can't. She's been in my dreams ever since, telling me she's going to find out I lied to her. Lied to her? Dad repeated. Yes, sir. I told her I'd never met anybody named Master George, and I hid the letters under the counter before she could see them. Flat out lied to her, and she told me bad things would happen if she ever found out I'd done it, and done it I did. So, Tick started, you quit your job because you were scared of her. Norbert looked down at his feet as if ashamed of himself. You got me all figured out, boy. Poor Norbert Johnson hasn't been the same since the day I met that golden devil. Quit my job, went on welfare, borrowed money. I've been a hiding in this house ever since. Only reason I met the tall lady who gave me the letters is because I heard a noise out in the backyard. I thought you said she came out of a graveyard, Dad said. She did. Like I said, back of my house is an old cemetery. Got too old, I reckon, so they built another one closer to town. Mothball, Tick said quietly. Huh? Norbert replied. Her name is Mothball, the lady who gave you this letter. Tick slipped it from his journal and held it in his hand. Norbert looked perplexed. Well, what in the Sears and Roebuck kind of a name is that? She said her dad was in a hurry when she named her, something about soldiers trying to kidnap them. Norbert did nothing but blink. Never mind, Tick turned to his dad. Why in the world would she have given him the sixth clue? His dad furrowed his brow for a moment, deep in thought. Well, maybe it's like I said. I think they wanted us to be proactive and seek out information, not just wait around to find it. Maybe they went back to all the towns they borrowed the letters from and gave copies of the clues to the postal workers who would cooperate. They knew if we did some investigating, going to the source would be the most logical step. Tick thought for a second. Dad, I think you nailed it. I'm brilliant, my son. Brilliant. He winked. Norbert cleared his throat. Excuse me for interrupting, folks, but what in the name of Kermit the Frog are you guys talking about? You came here asking me questions, but it sounds like you know a lot more than I do. Dad leaned over and patted Tick on the shoulder. My boy here, the one who's receiving these letters, is trying to figure out the big mystery behind them. We think it was a test of sorts to see if we'd seek you out, which is why you were given the sixth clue to give to us. Norbert nodded. Ah, I see. He rolled his eyes and shrugged his shoulders. Look, Tick said, do you know anything else about Master George, Mistress Jane, Mothball, anything? Norbert shook his head in response. Well then, Tick said, I think we've got what we came for, Dad. Maybe we should get going. I can read the clue while you drive. Tick tried his best to hint that he didn't feel very comfortable in Norbert's house. Just a minute, his dad looked at their host. Mr. Johnson, you've done a great service for us, and we'd like to return the favour. Is there anything we can do to help you help you get your nerve back and go back to work? Norbert didn't reply for a long time. Then, I don't know. It's awfully kind of you to offer. I guess I'm just too scared that woman is going to come back for me and string me up like a fresh catch of salmon. Well, let me tell you what I think, Dad said, holding up a finger. I agree with you 100%. I think this Mistress Jane person must be evil because we wholeheartedly believe what MG, Master George, is doing must be a noble cause because he wants my son's help. And we've committed to that cause heart and soul, as you can tell. I reckon I can see that. What's your point? Well, if this yellow-dressed, bald, nasty woman made you quit your job, shun society and hole up in a house all by yourself, then I think she's won a mighty victory over the world. She's beaten the great Norbert Johnson once and for all, and will move on to her next prey. Tick liked seeing his dad try and help this poor man and decided to do his part. Yeah, Norbert, you're doing exactly what she wanted you to do. Give up and be miserable. Go back to work, show her you're the boss of your own life. Norbert looked back and forth between Tick and his dad, his face a mask of uncertainty. And if she does come back, what then? Then, by golly, Dad said, stand up to her, show her who's in charge, and call us, Tick chimed in. By then, maybe we'll have figured everything out and know how to help you. Norbert scratched his head. Well, I don't know. I'm going to have to think about this. Dad smiled. Listen, We'll exchange phone numbers and keep in touch, okay? How's that sound? Norbert didn't answer for a very long time, and Tick wondered if something was wrong, but then he saw moisture rimming on the bottom of the man's eyes and realised the guy was all choked up. Finally, their new friend spoke. I can't tell you how much it means to me that you folks care enough to give me your phone number. I just wished you lived up here in Alaska. I could use a friend. Well, hey, Dad said, in this world, with the internet and all that, we can keep in touch just fine. And with that, their new friendship was sealed, and Tick felt mighty proud of himself. Frasier watched as Tick and his dad stepped out of the house, then shook his hands and embraced their new little buddy. They said a few more sappy words, just like they had inside, and headed for their vehicle. What is this, a soap opera? I might need a tissue for my weepy eyes. He snickered at his own joke, then put the car into drive, ready to follow. The twilight of midday having long faded into the full darkness of the late afternoon. Frasier pulled out his half of the special device and fingered the big button on them in the middle of its shiny grey surface. In just a few minutes, he thought, just a few minutes and the show begins.